I can't marry a friend. I'm not made for that life. What are you made for? Why didn't Jesus marry Mary Magdalene? Marriage is one of the most sacred human undertakings. It's ordained by God. The union of a man and his wife is a cardinal principle of the Christian experience. The Bible reports that Jesus, along with his mother, attended a local wedding ceremony. In fact, his first miracle, turning water into wine, was to ensure a marriage ceremony went as planned. So, Jesus was a supporter of marriage between a man and a woman. But why did Jesus refuse to marry? Did he get married? If so, to whom? In this episode, we'll explore these questions that have weighed on the minds of many believers. This has been a topic of interest to many believers. The four Gospels show that Jesus fully lived his humanity. For example, he was born to a human mother, experienced hunger and thirst, and was tempted, suffered pain, and died. What is missing from this list is one of the most sacred human experiences, marriage. The Bible is silent on this topic. Let's dive into the marriage status of Jesus. This episode will answer 3 key questions. 1. Was Jesus married? 2. If so, who was his wife? 3. If not, why not? Let's start with the first question. Was Jesus married? Scholars have debated this for a long time. Some believe Jesus must have been married. As you'll see, their reasoning is, it all seems pretty logical at first. But as you listen and watch, it's important to keep an open mind. Remember, logic isn't the same as truth. Here are the reasons scholars believe Jesus was married. 1. Cultural context. In the first century, Jewish culture, and during the period Jesus lived on earth, it was common and expected for Jewish men to marry. Given that Jesus was a practicing Jew, some people say it would have been unusual for Jesus to remain unmarried, given the social norms of the time. There are also some Gnostic Gospels. I mentioned earlier that the Bible doesn't say anything about Jesus' marital status. But I was only talking about the Bible as it's traditionally understood, as set out in the Nicene Creed. However, this constitution didn't include all existing scriptures at the time. In fact, many documents about the life of Christ on earth were deliberately left out of the Bible. Not only that, but such documents were banned, burned, destroyed, and anyone found with them was severely punished. As you would expect, many early followers, some people who followed Christ, didn't agree with the omissions. They hid the documents in caves and other places and passed them around from generation to generation. As a result, many of the documents were lost until recently. In the last few decades, many of these documents have been found, mostly by accident, and dug up from caves and other underground hiding places. Some of the non-canonical Gnostic texts recently discovered include the Gospel of Philip, which alludes to a close relationship between Jesus and one of his close female disciples. I'll reveal the name of the disciple in a moment, but remember that, like the canonical Gospels, the Gnostic Gospels were written many years, sometimes centuries, after the death of Christ. The Bible says that Jesus preached in the synagogue. Many scholars believe this proves that Jesus was married. They say that only men of status could preach in the synagogue, and that one way of gaining status at that time was through marriage. It's important to note that while this argument sounds logical, there is no historical evidence or explicit requirement that preaching in a synagogue necessitated that the person be married. Synagogues were Jewish places of worship, study, and community gathering, and they played a significant role in the religious and social life of Jewish communities during that time. However, there's no historical evidence or explicit requirement that preaching in a synagogue meant the person had to be married. Synagogues were places of worship and community gathering for Jews at the time. They played a big part in the religious and social life of Jewish communities. Celibacy isn't a requirement. Some Christian traditions emphasize it, but early Christianity didn't require its leaders to be celibate. Jesus didn't require his followers to be celibate either. Some scholars believe that if Jesus wanted to start a new religion, being married would have been in line with the cultural norms of the time. Some scholars think that the canonical Gospels might have left out details about Jesus' personal life, including his marital status, to focus on his teachings and mission. They say that because the Gospels were written decades after Jesus died, some things about his life might have been forgotten or ignored. For example, the Gospel of Mark is thought to have been written first, around 65 to 70 AD. The Gospel of Matthew was probably written between 70 and 85 AD. This Gospel is often seen as being influenced by the Gospel of Mark and other sources. The Gospel of Luke is generally dated between 80 and 90 AD. Like Matthew, Luke also drew upon the Gospel of Mark and other traditions while composing his Gospel. The Gospel of John is thought to have been written last, likely around 9100 AD, or even later. Because of the passage of time between Jesus' death and the writing of these Gospels, some scholars argue that certain details about Jesus' life, especially those not germane to his, it's possible that details about Jesus' ministry may have been omitted. As you can see, the reasons for believing that Jesus was married are very logical. Let's look at the disciple whom they claim Jesus was married to. While the canonical Gospel didn't corroborate this, the Gospel of Philip mentions Mary Magdalene as the female disciple with whom Jesus had a close relationship. This closeness is clear from reading the 4 canonical Gospels as well. In the Bible, Mary Magdalene is regarded as the apostle of apostles because Mary Magdalene was the first to see Jesus after he rose from the dead. The Bible says that Jesus told her to tell the others about his resurrection. The Gospel of Philip says that the apostles saw Jesus kiss Mary Magdalene on the mouth. But we shouldn't take this literally. The Hebrew word for kiss is nashik. It meant to commune, which was a common cultural practice. The Gospel also called Mary Jesus' companion. Again, this is a Greek word that means someone with a shared goal. It doesn't necessarily mean a spouse or partner. Canonical text, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. The apostles noted that Jesus loved Mary more than other women. Again, the wording is interesting, but it does not necessitate or even strongly suggest a marriage relationship. Or does it? Now it's time to answer question number 2. In spite of the logical argument presented so far, is it conclusive that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene? The answer is no. And the reason is simple. It is not. The canonical Gospel states that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene. As a Christian, I believe the canonical Gospel is accurate and represents the true Scriptures. If Jesus were married, it would have been stated in the Bible. Marriage is so important to Christianity that it is inconceivable that such an important aspect of Jesus' life would have been mistakenly omitted by the many writers. Some people think it might have been left out on purpose. But why? The Bible has lots of embarrassing stories, so it doesn't make sense that it would leave out Jesus' marriage. Especially since Jesus supported it. In Matthew 19, Jesus said, "Have you not read that he who made them in the first place made them man and woman?" It goes on to say, "For this reason a man will. He left his father and mother and lived with his wife. The two became one, so they were no longer two but one. Let no man divide what God has put together." This brings us to the last question. If Jesus was not married, why not? It is true that being married would not necessarily have negated the deity or perfection of Jesus, since marriage is not a sin and is ordained by God. However, there would have been significant implications. 1. If Jesus was married, it would mean he chose one woman on earth to love more than anyone else. This could have been seen as God loving different people differently. The church is the spiritual bride of Jesus. So it would have been confusing to reconcile Jesus having an earthly bride with his spiritual bride. The metaphor of the church as the bride of Christ would no longer make sense. If Jesus was married, he probably would have had children. This means that he would have left demigods on earth when he ascended to heaven. How would that have affected the claim that through Christ, we are children of God? In a marriage, a husband and wife become one flesh. If Jesus, who was sinless, married a woman who was sinful, would he then be tainted with sin? Check out my channel for more videos discussing the mysteries of the Bible.